He was just the janitor, until a young pilot spotted the faded wings hanging from his dog tags. Wings no one wears anymore. Wings issued to a man declared dead over 50 years ago. The Air Force lost him in Laos, presumed gone forever. But here he was, mopping floors, unnoticed, until one moment unraveled the truth and changed everything. If this man earned your respect, type "respect" in the comments and let him know he was never forgotten. The hangar echoed with the sounds of youth, boots on metal, laughter too loud, jets screaming in the distance like they were angry at the sky. Hangar 6 was alive with purpose, the kind only new pilots could bring. They were sharp-edged, fast-talking, half adrenaline, half ambition. And in the middle of it all, always just out of the way, was a man no one noticed. He swept, not quickly, not lazily, just steadily, like he had all the time in the world and none of it was wasted. His name tag, if anyone bothered to read it, was frayed at the corners. E. Kane, in stitched letters barely holding on. The jacket he wore was an old Flightline coat from 2 decades ago, sleeves rolled, zipper stuck halfway up, a single grease stain near the collar. His boots were polished, never gleaming, but never scuffed. His posture wasn't bad, but it leaned just slightly to the right, like he'd grown used to carrying a weight no one could see. He never spoke first. When addressed, he answered with a nod or a short word, nothing more. Just the janitor. That's what the young lieutenant said, with a shrug and a laugh. Probably worked base maintenance for years, the kind of guy who knew where every wrench and fuse box was but had never been within 10 feet of a cockpit. But then Mason Reed saw it. It happened between drills, when the day had burned hot and fast and everyone was catching their breath. Mason had stayed behind to clean his visor, fingers fumbling near his bench when something caught the light. A chain, not new, not dog tags issued post 9/11. These were older, worn thin, swinging beneath the old man's jacket. And for the briefest moment the coat shifted. What Mason saw wasn't the chain, it was what hung from it. A set of wings. Not just any wings. Command pilot wings, gold-trimmed, rare as ghosts. He froze. The old man looked up, just for a heartbeat. Blue eyes, clear and sharp beneath a ridge of age. He didn't smile, he didn't explain. He just nodded once and went back to sweeping. Mason didn't say a word, but something in him stood at attention. Mason couldn't stop thinking about it. The wings. Not the kind you get out of flight school, not the slick silver insignia they pinned on your chest before shipping you off to your first assignment. These were older, heavier. They had a story etched into their edges, the kind of story that doesn't make it into speeches or recruitment posters. They had no business being around the neck of a janitor. The next morning, Mason got to Hangar 6 earlier than usual. The sun hadn't fully risen, and the concrete floor still held the night's chill. Jets slept quietly in their bays. The air smelled of oil and burnt rubber, like the echo of 100 takeoffs still lingered in the rafters. And there he was, already working. The old man moved without sound, sweeping slowly across the floor like he was dusting off memories no one else could see. Mason tried to keep it casual. A slow approach, clipboard in hand, pretending to check the pre-flight list. But his eyes were on the chain. It swung gently with every step the janitor took, metal catching the hangar lights just enough to tease the edge of the wings again. He'd cleaned them once, long ago, but now the surface had dulled with time. Not from neglect, Mason thought, but from being worn for years, maybe decades. Carried through places the rest of them only read about in declassified files. "Morning," Mason said, trying not to sound like he was interrogating. The old man nodded, just once. "Lieutenant," that was all. One word, clean, respectful, then back to sweeping. Mason hesitated. "Those wings," he said gently. "They real?" The broom stopped. For the first time, the janitor looked directly at him. Not annoyed, not proud, just still. "They were," he said finally. "A long time ago." Mason swallowed. "Fighter?" A pause, a small nod, something like that. Then the broom moved again, slow and steady, tracing a path through dust and silence. Mason didn't press. He didn't need to, because some answers don't come in words. They come in the weight of a dog tag and the way an old man's hand rests over it when no one's supposed to be looking. The lunchroom in Hangar 6 wasn't much. 2 dented vending machines, a scratched table with mismatched chairs, and the smell of microwaved burritos that never fully left the air. It was a place for refueling more than resting. Pilots came and went between drills, laughing too loudly or staring too hard at their phones, trying to outrun the adrenaline buzz of a morning flight. Mason sat alone that day, halfway through a lukewarm sandwich, mind elsewhere. His eyes kept drifting toward the far corner, where the old janitor had taken up his usual post by the sink, mopping slowly around the edges of the tile like it mattered. No one else paid him any mind, but Mason watched. Not with suspicion, more like a quiet kind of reverence. He'd seen the wings again that morning, clearer this time. Confirmed they were real. The same kind issued to command pilots before his father was even born. He waited until the room emptied, until the others filtered out and the hum of idle conversation faded into silence. Then he stood, tray in hand, and crossed the room. "You always clean during lunch?" he asked, not unkindly. The old man looked up. "Only when there's a mess." Mason chuckled and set his tray down. "Mind if I ask you something?" The mop slowed but didn't stop. "You can ask. Did you ever fly?" The janitor didn't answer right away. He dipped the mop into the bucket, wrung it out with the same rhythm he always had, then let it rest against the wall. He leaned slightly on the handle, not tired, just thoughtful. "Once," he said, voice soft, "in a different lifetime." "What kind of aircraft?" He smiled then, not a wide smile. Just enough to crease the corners of his eyes. "The kind that didn't ask questions," he said. Then, after a pause, "and didn't answer many either." Mason stood there, caught between curiosity and respect. He wanted to ask more, but something in the old man's tone said that was enough for now. The mop lifted again, gliding across the tile in practiced strokes. Mason didn't push. He just watched, quietly, because sometimes silence says more than a story ever could. It started with a file request. Mason kept it casual at first. Just a name, a cross-check with HR, a glance at the maintenance logs to see if the janitor was even on the books. But there was nothing. No employment record, no background check, no hire date. Just a name written in pen on a clipboard that hadn't been updated in years. E. Kane. Like he had walked in one day, picked up a broom, and no one ever questioned it. Mason asked around. Admin didn't know anything. Security shrugged. One of the senior officers guessed he was contracted through base ops, or maybe he's just always been here. The answers were vague, dismissive. Nobody had ever really looked at him long enough to care. Except for Red. Red was a crew chief who'd been on base longer than anyone could remember. Vietnam vet. Cracked hands, sun-battered skin, always had a socket wrench in one hand and a half-finished story in the other. Mason found him under the nose of an F-15, muttering at a panel that refused to stay flush. "You're asking about Kane?" Red didn't look up. "Most people don't." Mason crouched beside him. "I just thought he looked familiar." Red snorted. "He should. That man flew ghosts." Mason blinked. "He was a pilot?" Red leaned back, wiped his hands on a rag that probably used to be white. Flew phantoms in Nam. Fast, low, and quiet. The kind of missions they never logged, the kind where you weren't expected to come back. What happened? Red's voice dropped. KIA, or so they said. His bird went down in Laos, no recovery, no body, no ejection. Just gone. He shook his head. But I knew it was him the moment I saw those eyes. You don't forget a face that flew through hell. Why didn't anyone say anything? Red gave a long, slow shrug. Maybe they thought he wanted it that way. Maybe they're right. Mason didn't speak. The hangar buzzed faintly behind them, life moving on like it always does. But he looked past it, through it, toward the quiet man in the corner, pushing a mop across the concrete floor. A ghost who never asked to be found. The base museum was tucked behind administration, past the flagpoles and the visitors' gate, quiet as a chapel. Most pilots passed it daily without stepping inside. It smelled like history, lacquered wood, old photographs, the faint scent of fabric too long under glass. It was a place built not for noise but for memory. You didn't go there to be seen. You went to remember. Mason stood beneath the skylight, the late afternoon sun filtering down in fractured rays, casting slanted shadows across the polished floor. He moved slowly, hands behind his back, letting his eyes trace the wall. The wall of honor stood at the far end of the museum, black granite framed in oak, lined with names. Dozens of them. All carved with precision. The letters deep and permanent. Each name belonged to someone who never came home. Some had photos beside them, others just dates and aircraft IDs. But each one told a story, unfinished, silent, waiting. And there, toward the center, marked by a small gold star instead of a silver one, was the name that stopped Mason cold. Captain Elias M. Kane, Recon 7, Phantom 2, Laos, 1971. Status, MIA, presumed lost, never recovered. It didn't feel like reading history. It felt like reading a secret. The photograph was old, black and white. A man, barely in his 30s, square jaw, flight helmet under one arm, the glint of something wild and steady in his eyes. Mason stared at the picture for a long time, then at the name beneath it. He'd known, somewhere in his gut. But seeing it here, etched into stone, stamped by official memory, made it real in a way no dog tag ever could. Presumed lost. But he wasn't lost. He was in Hangar 6, pushing a mop with the hands that once gripped the stick of a phantom. Eating lunch alone, sweeping floors where planes now roared overhead, piloted by men who didn't know the ground they walked on had been paid for by ghosts like him. Mason stepped back and read the name again. Not because he didn't believe it, but because it felt like someone, somewhere, needed to say it out loud. Not gone, not forgotten, not anymore. Mason didn't go back to Hangar 6 right away. He needed time. To think, to settle the weight of what he'd seen at the museum. But by the end of the week, something in him couldn't stay still. Curiosity had turned into something else. Not obligation, not pity. Just a feeling deep in the bones of every good pilot. A sense that something important was flying low under the radar, and if you didn't catch it now, it would disappear for good. The hangar was quieter than usual. Midday lull. Most of the squadron was out on maneuvers, and the jet bays echoed with the creak of distant wind through the rafters. Elias was there, as always, mop in hand, tracing the concrete with steady strokes. Mason stood near the lockers for a while, watching. Noticing the limp again, the way the dog tags pressed flat beneath his shirt, and the wings just barely visible when the collar shifted. He approached slowly. "You flew a Phantom," Mason said, not as a question, but as a statement. His voice was calm, respectful. Elias didn't stop mopping. "So you figured it out. I saw your name on the wall, MIA, presumed lost." A pause. The mop slowed, then stopped. "Not lost," Elias said quietly. "Just not who I used to be." Mason stepped closer, but didn't crowd him. "Why didn't you come back?" Elias rested his hands on the mop handle and stared down at the floor like it still held pieces of the sky he once flew through. "I did come back," he said. "Just not the way they wanted me to." Mason nodded slowly. "You could have told someone." He gave a small, tired smile. "What would I say? That I survived when my crew didn't? That I walked out of the jungle with half a map and none of myself? That I couldn't listen to an engine start without feeling like I was falling again?" The words weren't bitter, just honest, stripped of drama, like truth that had been polished smooth over years of silence. "I didn't come back the same man," Elias said, "and sometimes it's easier to let them remember the one who didn't." Mason didn't argue. He just stood there quietly and for the first time didn't see a janitor. He saw a pilot still trying to land. It started as a whisper, not an order, not a memo, just the kind of rumor that moves sideways through a base, passed between clipped conversations and sideways glances. No one said his name out loud, but suddenly, the younger pilots were a little quieter walking past Hangar 6. A few even nodded at the old man pushing the mop. Elias didn't change. He still swept like time didn't matter. Still moved like each step had a rhythm only he could hear. But the air around him shifted, just a little, like people had started listening without asking questions. Then, one Thursday morning, the colonel came. Not with an entourage, not with a clipboard or a reprimand or a speech about protocol. Just a quiet presence at the edge of the hangar, hands clasped behind his back, eyes scanning the floor like he was looking for something no report could tell him. Colonel Davis was known on base for his precision. Sharp creases, sharp orders, sharp eyes. He didn't make surprise visits. Not here. Not to the maintenance bay of a hangar that never needed inspection. And yet, there he was. Elias didn't stop sweeping when he saw him. Just shifted course, tracing the broom along the far wall. He didn't flinch. Didn't acknowledge the higher rank standing 10 feet away. But the broom slowed just enough that someone paying close attention might have noticed the tremor in his hand. The colonel waited, and when Elias finally turned the corner, Broom paused at his side, their eyes met. There was no salute, no handshake, no name exchanged, just a pause. Then, with no words at all, Colonel Davis straightened his posture and brought his hand up, clean, deliberate, textbook sharp, and saluted. Elias didn't return it, but his eyes softened, and for a moment the silence between them said everything. The colonel lowered his hand and nodded once, not as an officer, but as something older, something heavier. He left without a word. Elias watched him go, then turned back to the mop, pushing dust along the floor that had just become somehow sacred. Because when a man like that salutes you without ceremony, without audience, it means you were seen and remembered. The morning came in quiet, wrapped in fog that clung low to the tarmac and turned the flight line into a ghost of itself. Engines hadn't started yet. The ground crews hadn't spilled from the break room. Just mist and silence and the distant hum of something about to begin. Mason was early. Too early for any briefing, too late to pretend he wasn't restless. He stepped outside Hangar 6 to get some air, half expecting to find it empty. But Elias was there. Not sweeping, not mopping. Just standing, still as stone, at the edge of the airstrip, his back to the hangar, his silhouette cut clean against the pale gray morning. In one hand, his dog tags hung loose, the chain tangled between his fingers. They glinted now and then as the fog thinned and sunlight tried to break through. He wasn't wearing his jacket, just an old Flightline shirt, sleeves rolled up, the faded outline of a squadron patch barely visible on the shoulder. He watched the runway like it was a memory. Mason didn't speak, just waited. Elias didn't turn. A few minutes later, a pair of jets screamed overhead. Early departure, full afterburner. Mason flinched at the sudden roar, instinctively ducking his head, but Elias didn't move. His eyes tracked them the way only a pilot does, reading angle, speed, power, not out of habit, but from somewhere deeper, like watching pieces of himself still up there in the sky. When the sound faded and only the vapor trails remained, Elias took a breath. Long, slow, then he turned. Mason saw it clearly this time. The tags in his hand, aged and dulled, but unmistakable. The wings, the name, the number worn almost smooth. Elias walked back to the hangar, quiet as ever. At the door, he paused, reached up, and slipped the chain over the metal handle. The tags swung gently, catching the light. He didn't look back. When the crew arrived an hour later, the hangar was spotless. Mop stowed, lights off. And on the door, swaying in the breeze like something sacred left behind, hung the only truth Elias Kane had never spoken. A name, a rank, and a pair of wings in the dust. No orders were sent, no emails, no postings on the bulletin board or base-wide calls over the PA. But somehow they all knew. By the time the sun crested over the eastern tree line, a quiet line of figures had already begun to form outside Hangar 6. Pilots mostly, a few mechanics, one or two officers standing in silence, hands folded behind their backs. Uniforms were mixed, some in flight suits, others in dress blues, a few in stained coveralls from the night shift who hadn't gone home yet. No formation was called, but they arranged themselves with quiet precision, shoulders squared, heels aligned. Not because anyone told them to, because it felt right. The hangar doors were closed at first. The dog tags still hung on the handle, swaying faintly in the breeze. Some of the pilots had never spoken to him. Others had only exchanged nods, passing glances between flights. But all of them had felt something shift the day those tags appeared. Something unspoken, something earned. Then the door creaked open. Elias Kane stepped through slowly, his old jacket buttoned all the way up for once. The patch on the shoulder was clearer now, aged but proud. His gait was steady. Limp still there, but lighter somehow. He carried nothing. No mop, no gear, just himself. The line of pilots stood tall as he walked past. No salute was given. No anthem played. But the silence between them held more weight than either. Mason stood near the front. When Elias passed him, their eyes met. Mason didn't speak, just gave a small, respectful nod. Elias returned it with the faintest smile, the kind that only happens when words would ruin everything. He made his way down the line slowly, his boots tapping soft against the concrete. When he reached the end, he paused, turned, and the pilots stood taller. No speech, no ceremony, just a final look. A man, once presumed lost, walking through the center of the lives he had unknowingly shaped. Elias stepped into the morning sun, past the rows of men who now understood who had been sweeping their hangar all along. And for one brief, perfect moment, he wasn't invisible. He was home. The museum was quieter than usual that morning. Maybe it was the time of day, or maybe it was the weather outside. Soft rain tapping the windows, the kind that slows everything down. A few visitors wandered through the exhibits, their footsteps softened by the carpet, their voices hushed like they'd stepped into something sacred. Mason was alone when he saw it. He hadn't come looking for it. He hadn't even planned to stop. But something had pulled him in as he passed the glass doors. The same pull that had once made him look twice at a pair of old dog tags swinging beneath a janitor's collar. The wall of honor looked the same at first. Same granite, same deep etchings of names and dates and aircraft lost to time. But near the center, just below a row of MIA pilots from Vietnam, was something new. A small brass nameplate, polished to a quiet shine. Not flashy, not prominent, just there, waiting to be noticed. Captain Elias M. Kane, Recon 7, Phantom 2, Laos, 1971. Returned with honor. Not presumed lost, not never recovered. Just returned. Above it, the old photograph remained. A younger Kane, standing beside his aircraft. Helmet under one arm, eyes focused on something far beyond the lens. And beside the plaque, a small velvet box encased in glass containing the same wings Mason had seen that first day, the ones dulled with years, but unmistakable in their truth. But it was what stood in the corner that stopped Mason's breath for a moment. A broom, leaning gently against the wall, old, worn, the wooden handle smooth from decades of use. It didn't have a plaque or a sign, it didn't need one, because everyone who mattered would understand. Mason stepped closer, eyes tracing the quiet tribute. No fanfare, no ceremony, just a place carved into history for a man who never asked for recognition, only a place to serve, and maybe one day to be remembered. And now, finally, he was.